Dialogue with a Doctor, featuring one of Southwest Florida's leading gastroenterologists, Dr. Raymond Phillips of Gastroenterology Group of Naples.
Welcome to our show. Well, Dr. Phillips, thank you for coming on the show today.
Well, thanks so much for having me back again, Joe.
So our viewers, let's just tell them a little bit about yourself if they haven't heard of you or seen one of our previous shows.
Well, absolutely. I'm a gastroenterologist, and that's a specialist in digestive disease. And it actually represents a degree of training that's fairly extensive. You know, I went to college at Princeton and graduated, and then I did my internal medicine. Went to medical school at Washington University in St. Louis, and then I did my internal medicine training at Jefferson Hospital in Philadelphia. I was chief resident, and because I'd gone through Princeton on ROTC scholarship, I went on active duty at that point and was assigned as an internist to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. And then I was selected for gastroenterology training at Walter Reed. And then after my training was complete at Walter Reed, I was selected to be on the staff at Walter Reed, where I did research for a number of years. And I came down to Naples in the 1990s. And over the years, our practice has grown, and there's myself, Dr. Gustavo Rivera, Dr. Rafael Ebrina, as well as Dr. Susan Lebersky and Dr. Sandra Hara. So, our practice, is in Naples at Colonial Square, but we also have offices on Marco Island and Bonita. So my point in your question is, hey, what's a gastroenterologist? They're an expert in digestive diseases. And not only issues in terms of the gastrointestinal system, but the liver, the pancreas, et cetera. And so we as well have specific training in nutrition. We're experts in nutrition, the physiology of digestion, which in recent years has gotten a lot more attention.
Yeah, and that's what brings us here today. We're going to talk about different diets, gluten-free, organic, and GMO. So maybe just talk a little bit about that, how it affects people, and what's good, what's bad, or maybe none of them?
Well, a gluten-free diet, just to give you a little perspective, we'll talk about that first. That has gotten a great deal of attention over the last 10 years. But its role in disease activity was first identified after World War II. And to briefly give you a little story, is that in World War II, the Netherlands was under a great isolation. They had famine across much of the country, and there was no wheat supplies for most of the children. And many of the children that had diarrheal illnesses before the onset of World War II, in the absence of intake of wheat, their diarrheal illnesses went away, and instead of losing weight, they were actually gaining weight, whereas all the other citizens in the Netherlands were losing weight because of the absence of food or the reduced amount of food. After World War II concluded and food supplies were reestablished and wheat was distributed all across the Netherlands, these children who had diarrheal illnesses to start had a resumption of their diarrheal illnesses at the conclusion of World War II. So it was only then that it was realized and subsequently identified a condition called celiac disease, which represents a type of allergic reaction to a protein in wheat called gluten. It had formerly been thought that celiac disease was extraordinarily rare, but over the last 20 years it's become clear that it's very, very common, that about 1 in 100 or 1 in 125 Americans will have celiac disease. What we're realizing, and this is just most evident now in the last 5 or 10 years, is that there's a certain percentage of the population, about 10 or 15%, that have symptoms when they take in gluten-containing products. They have symptoms to the extent that they'll get abdominal bloating or cramping and irregular bowel movements, even diarrhea, but it doesn't represent celiac disease. But nonetheless, if they reduce gluten in their diet, they'll actually feel better in terms of having those reduced amount of symptoms. Now, go ahead.
Go on. No, go on.
You got me excited now.
Yeah,
I'm on a roll now.
Okay.
When I get on a roll, I get excited. So the science behind this is really interesting because gluten, which is a protein,
right,
it's part of the wheat kernel, and what it does is helps protect the little lunchbox for the little seedling that is to grow. and the protein encases the kernel and makes it hard to digest. So that even though it's ground up and prepared as a flour and given as wheat or pasta, or bread or pasta, your GI tract can't absorb, cannot fully digest the carbohydrates in wheat because of the gluten. And as a result, a component of that, about 15%, will not be absorbed in your small intestine, arrive in the colon, be fermented by bacteria, and that will lead to production of intestinal gas. And for that, certain percentage of the population are very, very sensitive to that distension from that gas, and that in turn can cause bloating and cramping.
And how about organic?
Well, organic is a little bit different.
Yeah, it is.
And it's a little bit different, and it's a different perspective. The organic diet has a very, very specific definition by the Food and Drug Administration. Specific in the sense that it has to meet certain criteria before a particular food product can be labeled as organic. The general sense of it had been, in the past, it was a response to food that had been raised in the context, produced in the context of exposure to pesticides and various fertilizers, and been perhaps exposed to different other products in the course of production, in the context of meat production, different antibiotics and so forth. And so there was a sort of pushback from consumers demanding an alternative product that didn't involve these different exposures to different items in the process of production of food. And so in that sense, an organic diet is one that meets these very specific criteria of the Food and Drug Administration. Now, the difficulty is that in general, other components of organic diet from the consumer's perspective may involve an element of freshness or directness from the consumer that may not necessarily fit the criteria from the Food and Drug Administration. And increasingly, there's a perspective among consumers who are advocates of exclusive organic diet that somehow that it's healthier, that it's preferred, that it's better for you, that there's better nutritional content. And this theme has been picked up in the media and has been sort of repeated, and now is almost regarded as a truth. And that's overstating the factor. Yes, indeed, there's a definition for organic diet, organic food, but it doesn't mean it's any healthier or it's any better than other nutritional foods. For example, if you have foods that are canned or frozen, they have the same nutritional content as fresh organic foods. Fresh organic foods might taste a little bit better, but the nutritional content is the same. So if someone cannot have the resources to purchase organic foods, they don't have to feel like they're depriving their family by not having less expensive sources of nutrition to be provided for their family. So it's a circumstance where it's worthwhile to keep in mind is that although organic diet certainly has its advocates from the nutritional component of the food. Now we're talking science here, okay?
That's
we're not
right.
talking about your beliefs and so forth. We're not talking about, what you think. Everything I tell you about is based on physiology of nutrition that has been studied and examined in prospective, randomized trials in terms of, and so I'm specifically couching this in terms of nutritional component in terms of the nutrition you extract from your food. Now, other people might respond, just to give a full transparency and an opportunity for those who might argue and not present, is that, well, the pesticides are bad for you. Maybe there's other components in the food. Well, that's not really been studied, and in studies by the Food and Drug Administration, none of those components have led to any kind of health risks. So I'm just speaking up to say that, yeah, there is a definition for an organic diet. People who prefer that, that's their choice, but it doesn't have to be a choice that's placed on everyone in the entire world. Because the reality is a lot of people in the world, and not everybody can have the resources and the time to consume or produce organic foods. It's just not feasible given the number of people on the planet.
Right. How about GMO?
Genetically modified organisms, the other name for GMO, and increasingly, whether you realize or not, this has transformed the food industry because individuals that have identified genetically modified organisms as something that might be a potential concern in food production. Now, let me give you an example of a genetically modified organism. For example, in certain parts of the world, they don't have enough water on a regular basis in terms of rainfall to be able to raise certain crops, like in some parts of sub-Saharan Africa as well as in South America. So by developing food products, corn and wheat, that can tolerate degrees of drought, you can increase food production and farmland that would not be productive otherwise and would allow individuals in those parts of the world to be able to feed themselves. So various food products, wheat and corn, have been modified to allow those plants to be able to grow and thrive in areas of the world where there's less water available for the plants. And so it can increase food production, allow individuals to survive and provide for themselves in those parts of the world. So that's an example of a genetically modified organism. There are other types of genetically modified organisms, plants, or even animals that have been developed over the years. There is somehow a belief, though, that if you consume a genetically modified organism, that somehow, in some way, the genes that are present in those organisms will somehow get into your own genome and somehow alter your own genes, which shows a profound misunderstanding of the GI tract. Again, I'm an expert in the GI tract. From a GI tract's perspective, right, it's had like 250 million years to get it right. It can take food, chop up that food into its component parts, protein, carbohydrates, fat, and then break it down into the component parts of protein, amino acids, and carbohydrates, and absorb it. It can slice, it can dice, and it doesn't matter whether it's genetically modified organism or not. It will fully break that down, including genes, and digest it without any problem. So you're not gonna, taking a genetically modified organism is not gonna alter your genome or allow any kind of genes to be passed on to anyone else. But it shows a sort of profound misunderstanding of the nature of these products. But again, it's a belief not necessarily founded on any kind of science that somehow these foods are bad nutritionally, and that's just not the case at all. But the food industry wants to sell food, and they want to sell food to everybody, whether they're informed or not. And so they're happy to put that item and that designation on their food if it allows them to sell food to the whole population.
Well, Dr. Phillips, I appreciate you coming on the show, and I'm sure our viewers have learned a lot from what you've just told us about gluten-free, organic, and GMO. And I'm sure they'll pick whatever they think is best for them, right?
Well, absolutely, but I'm sure I'll get some pushback on this, and so I'm happy to discuss it further with any viewers who want to discuss it further individually.
Well,
thanks so much, Jim.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Are you in need of a gastroenterologist in the Naples, Marco Island, or Bonita Springs area? Dr. Raymond Phillips of Gastroenterology Group of Naples, along with his fellow physician associates, are board certified in gastroenterology hepatology and one of the most respected medical practices in Southwest Florida. Hear it from one of his patients directly.
I've been a patient of Dr. Phillips for myself personally the last 20-25 years. He's treated my family, my extended family, my friends. I never mind coming here because it's a very friendly place, and everyone here makes me feel that way. They're so caring, And Dr. Phillips, I get a chuckle out of him because everywhere in his building it says, "We work where the sun don't shine."
With the medical industry changing so rapidly, Dr. Raymond Phillips offers the newest technology and treatments in his field. If you're looking for a practice that is attentive and will address all your questions and concerns, call Dr. Phillips' Naples office today for an appointment at 239-649-1186.